Kaixo, Arratsaldeon. Buenas tardes,
Good
bienvenidos.
afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I'm Aran Archa, Director of UNHCR, a civil society organization that aims to promote UN values, programs, and inform the Basque Country. On behalf of the Local2030 Coalition, the Government of Spain, the Basque Government, the Bilbao City Council, and the BBK Foundation, we welcome you to this event. La Coalición Local2030 es la plataforma
The Localization of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It is a global effort that recognizes that inclusive, multi-level governance and engagement are crucial to achieving the SDGs, and that mobilizing investment and finance must be an integral part of the localization process. El Reino de España, el Gobierno vasco, la ciudad de Bilbao y la Fundación BBK juntaron sus esfuerzos con la Coalición 2030, presentando una propuesta para la oficina, albergar la oficina de Local 2030 aquí en
join forces with the Local 2030 Coalition by presenting a whole of government, whole of society proposal to host the Local 2030 Coalition Secretariat in Bilbao. Opened on the 31st of October 2022, the Secretariat in Bilbao aims to energize the work of the Local 2030 Coalition and further advance the localization of the SDGs within the UN system and at the territorial level.
Has been chosen as one of the high-impact initiatives of the United Nations to accelerate the achievement of the SDGs and promoting local practices, initiatives, and solutions for Agenda 2030 and multi-level governance with a multi-agent perspective. 1 year after the opening of the Secretariat, the Local 2030 Coalition gathers here again in Bilbao to showcase the main results of the job done so far and to look forward to the future, to look towards the Summit of the Future that will take place next year and to look towards 2030. We want to ensure that the United Nations and the SDG Localization champions join forces to advance co-creating local solutions for sustainable development. Damos paso a esta primera.
Let's move on to this next section where we will have the 5 organizations that sponsor the Local 2030 Coalition here in Bilbao. And we're going to start with Álvaro Torres Suárez, who's Subdirector General of Planning, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, European Union and Cooperation of Spain. I'm hoping you can hear me okay. As Aran, my name is Álvaro. I work at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, European Union and Cooperation. Welcome. For us, it truly is a pleasure to be able to take part representing the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and say a few words about what for us this Local 2030 Coalition actually represents and the fact that the Secretariat has its HQ here in Bilbao. Please allow me to remind, first of all, something that Aaron has already said, which is only a week from the first anniversary of the setting up of the Local 2030 Coalition Secretariat here in Bilbao. And we think this is something that we should congratulate ourselves for, in fact, congratulate everybody, all the stakeholders that have taken part in this initiative, starting with the Bilbao City Council, of course, the Basque government, the ministries that are involved from the Spanish government. That's the Ministry of the State for 2030 Agenda, and of course, my own ministry, and of course, the United Nations and the BBK Foundation representing the private sector. Congratulations is actually due to the fact that we've been able to coordinate at a multi-stakeholder level everything that's happened, so as to be able to carry on working towards localization at all administration levels and even including the civil society and the private sector. I think all the work of all these institutions should perhaps you would think that it's difficult to get all these institutions working in the same direction. And that's taken a great deal of work, but we've managed to do it. And it reflects this conviction. It's not just a belief, it's the conviction that all institutions believe in localization. Yes, we can work towards this strong Local 2030 Coalition Secretariat. As for what does it mean for the ministry, the 2030 agenda and the localization process, perhaps I'd just like to say it's like a few thoughts out loud, and they're thoughts maybe that perhaps we all share and that we all believe in, but maybe it's also useful to remind us. I'd like to first of all remind us of the completely universal nature of the 2030 agenda. The people that were involved in this process from the start, when I spoke to them once, when they were still designing their 2030 agenda, they reminded me the many occasions when there's been the greatest level of consensus amongst all states and governments of the world. The commitment to the 2030 agenda is very complicated, but actually they've managed to do so. Let's not forget that. It's universal because there was absolute, full, complete consensus. SDGs with their indicators, their goals associated to them are integral in nature. They include everything that we want to do, and they're indivisible. And as they are universal, worldwide, it's also true that if we're going to put them into practice, we also need to include local realities. Of course we do. The effort that we need to make to implement them should be adapted to regional and local realities. Otherwise, they will never be achieved. And perhaps we could summarize that as the globalized dimension of localization. That is, to do something global, we need to divide it up and do it locally, because each local part that it's divided up into has different needs and different goals. That might be me stating the obvious, what I'm saying now. There's a lot of common sense behind it, but we can also give some figures to support this idea. For example, an OECD report that was published and which said that of the 179 goals associated to these SDGs, 105 could not actually be achieved without getting true engagement from local and regional authorities. That's around 62% of the 2030 agenda goals that require local support to be achieved. And I know it's really difficult to measure, but it's a report that gave some very precise figures and used some very indicators. So we don't mind if it's 62%, 52%, or 42%. The reality is, if there is no support from local authorities, there will be not full implementation of SDGs. And I'd like to carry on reminding you of the commitment that the Spanish government has made to achieving a 2030 agenda. And that route takes me back to a law passed in January, where if you read this law that was passed in January, it mentions quite clearly the 2030 agenda. It's like the guiding thread throughout this law, and where a great deal of importance attached to local and regional factors. These are key and have a specific weight if SDGs are going to be implemented. We feel that the current administrative distribution of different powers and the fact that they're close to the public and the possibility of developing things locally just really give the starring role to everything that is local as far as SDGs go. And not just for this law, we could actually prove our commitment that way. We could also even say, even though I may be you may accuse me of being arrogant, we also believe that we have a leadership role when we talk about localizing. You could say, back in 2018, for example, There was unconditional support from the Spanish government for the creation of the Local 2030 initiative within the framework of the UN's. During the high-level meeting in Seville, quite clearly the Seville Declaration was supported as a key declaration. And in 2022, as Aaron said, we provided the resources necessary for the creation of this Local 2030 Coalition Secretariat here in Bilbao. And finally, something else I wanted to mention, which sort of actually make us focus down on the work involved in implementing SDGs. Recently, this last month, our Secretary of State has been designated by the Secretary General of the UN as a co-president of the consultative body on local and regional government, so as to try to coordinate and implement SDGs at a local level. And that's all I wanted to say, really. Of course, I need to say thank you to the organizers of this event, everybody that's taken part, all the stakeholders that are engaged in this great project. And we hope that this event can help us, thanks to the 2 panels of experts that are going to be able to talk to us. These are the experts, so we can hope they can share their vision, their ideas, give us their guidance about the working agenda, both the Local 2030 Coalition and its Secretariat as well. And we're hoping that it's useful. Of course, we all need that to be useful to start drilling down to the local government level. And I reiterate the commitment of all the stakeholders, including the ministry that I am here representing at this time of work and the road that needs to be followed still. I hope this is a useful event for you. I hope it actually adds as well something to the upcoming Summit of the Future in 2024. And without further ado, I'm going to hand the floor over to our next speaker. Thank you. Let's now hand the floor over to Cristina Linaje-Hervas, who's the head of the Cabinet of the Secretary of State for the 2030 Agenda at the Ministry of Social Rights and 2030 Agenda of Spain. And she's going to be connecting via video link. Cristina, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. Good afternoon, everybody. First, I'd like to say thanks to UN Habitat and the Basque government for inviting me to speak. It's a pleasure to be here today with you, even though I'm remote. We are one of the stakeholders so that this Secretariat of Local 2030 Coalition actually became reality in Bilbao. I should like to say congratulations for organizing this event to publicize this important initiative of the UN, which I'm sure will be relevant in coming years. As many of you already know, the Secretary of State for the 2030 Agenda, ever since it was set up in 2020, has been coordinating all the efforts by the Spanish government to implement this international agenda. And whilst doing that, localization of the 2030 agenda is one of the key aspects that we've really wanted to put greatest effort into it, not just linked to what's happening in Bilbao, but also of other things that are being carried out throughout Spain. And we've done not only just by setting up by a specific governance structure, which facilitates multi-stakeholder and multi-level actor as a place for different fora, but also we've wanted to concentrate our work and our direct support on local authorities, local entities that are represented by the FEM, to try to make sure that the 2030 agenda reaches out to all those local administrations that are closest to the public. The result of this work has meant that the network of local authorities for the 2030 agenda is the largest and the most numerous of networks in Spain. I think there are over 600 local authorities that have joined us, and they represent over 30 million people. And I wanted to highlight that because it's a significant and a very illustrative figure which shows the potential of this initiative. This network is a place where we can exchange experiences, get to know each other, and help capacity building at a local level. And now it's spreading to other fields such as measuring indicators for local progress and policy coherence at a local level. We've done that work with other lines of direct financial support for local authorities so that they can improve their strategic planning and localize the SDGs according to their realities at a local level and their priorities. But rather than concentrating on the work that we've been doing over recent years, what I wanted to share to you this afternoon is how we understand localization processes and what do they require for them to be effective, because this is the spirit that's behind all the initiatives that we've been driving forward, and we're sure that will also be included in the Local 2030 Coalition Secretariat's work. The first thing is we feel that localization can't just be a process via which local governments or regional governments transfer their SDG policies, but rather a significant social and political process for the whole of society. So it's what we call in English the whole of government, or whole of government approach to a whole of society approach, i.e. the whole of society is involved in obtaining sustainable development. We feel that is even more urgent in the current context, because the 2030 agenda has now become sort of a political weapon, and as a result of that, it's starting to be questioned by certain sections of the population. And I don't think this is something that only happens in Spain. I feel it probably happens in other European countries, and in fact outside Europe, beyond Europe. So if we don't guarantee that localization becomes a significant social and political process, then the citizenry will lose their engagement. We need their engagement if we're going to speed up our efforts. So I think there's a challenge at all levels of government, all public levels, but also in organized civil society to get better acceptance of the 2030 agenda by society. And society feels that it's significant to solve the daily needs that they face. Second issue is that in addition to these localization processes need to be upscaled and need to feed into the decisions of implementation into the 2030 agenda that are taken, whether they be at a state, European or international level. This true commitment, a true reality of co-governance, which we feel has at the very least two positive sides to it. Firstly, of course, that's a way of decisions taken at these levels can be improved because they're more based on real needs and the effects of policies on territories and people. And secondly, because it improves internal coherence in the application of the 2030 agenda, which is another key issue to maximize their impact. I'd like to conclude here, and I'd like to say, I know this is the approach that is going to be included in the work of the Secretariat in upcoming years, and this is going to be key for its success to upscale its impact. And of course, you will at all times have the collaboration, the support of this Secretary of State. Thank you so much. Greetings also from everybody here in Bilbao, everybody that's here today. I'm now going to hand the floor of Jacier Arambari Ursalai, Director of Social Innovation, General Secretariat of Social Transition into the 2030 Agenda at the Basque Government. Thank you so much, Aran.
It's a big pleasure with us. You are here in this event. Nire aldetik laburra izaten ahaleginduko naiz. Bereziki
I'm going to try to be brief. What I want to highlight here is collaboration. I think that the fact that the Secretariat of this is here in Bilbao is thanks to collaboration. People talk a lot about collaboration, but on very few occasions is it put into practice because it's very difficult. If it were easy, everybody would be doing it. Collaboration has been difficult, but the results have been significant. We've collaborated with Spanish ministries, with the Basque government, the Bilbao City Council, the BBK Foundation. And this is what I want to showcase today. And not only that, I want to highlight the role of everybody that's in this room. Collaboration with society, because the 2030 Agenda is nothing if there's no collaboration from civil society. It will be transformative in nature if all of civil society gets on board. Institutional participation is insufficient, so I'd like to say thanks to all the people that are following us here and online. The 2030 Agenda and meeting SDGs is going to be successful. Of course it is, because behind the implementation of SDGs and the 2030 Agenda is because there's a true alliance behind it. We in the Basque government, we are really interested in SDG 17, which is Partnership for Goals. It really is important to create partnerships, both at an institutional and a private level. It's difficult, but it can be done. It can be done. And I think the example of the Local 2030 Coalition Secretariat, the fact that the UN, a world organization, has its secretariat here. We're not talking about a little office in Bilbao that's going to localize the 2030 Agenda at a Basque level. No, we're talking about something that happens at a world level. The UN Local 2030 Coalition Secretariat is going to be here in Bilbao. And this is something that's so important and is a reality today. And it's a result of institutional work, of a lot of institutional work between the Basque government, the Spanish government, the BBK Foundation, and the Bilbao City Council. And we're all very much aware of the need for institutional collaboration, but everybody knows that it's tough. Whatever political group is in charge, but we've managed to do it. I really do think the fact that we've been able for the last 2 or 3 years, which is actually for us an eternity, but apparently from what I've heard from the UN this morning, it's not that long. But here we are. So here we are on the verge of opening with staff a secretariat of the United Nations. I'm hoping that Shipra will give us a few more ideas of timescale. And I really want to showcase that, because interinstitutional collaboration is insufficient. In fact, it's meaningless if you don't have the participation of the whole of society. And that's why we set up the Forum of social transition and 2030 agenda. We set up the GUNEAC space within this forum, and we realized that there were lots of people in civil society that were working on things related to the 2030 agenda, because it's not a matter of reinventing the wheel or creating something new, but rather organizing what we already had. I think that's what actually the administration should be doing, and that's actually what we're attempting to do, taking very, very small steps. And I think the Local 2030 Secretariat should do that as well. They provide a sort of a framework so that what society does has a multiplying effect and can be transferred, thanks to the Local 2030 Coalition Secretariat, to other places around the planet. I think that's what we really do at the end of the day. There are 50 people here in the room today. Behind the screen there are a further 51 people. So that means there's over 100 people here that are interested in the localization of the Agenda 2030. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. So what we need to do is to showcase what society is already doing and try to multiply it, try to inject a multiplying factor, upscale those projects that are already out there. And I really do feel this is what we are trying to do in the 2030 Basque Alliance. This morning when we spoke to Shipra about what the Basque country can offer, what Basque institutions and Basque society as a whole can offer, I think that's what it is, actually. It's a way of, it's a form of governance, and our 2030 agenda. When the Basque government talks about Ausolana, which means public-private collaboration, that's what it's talking about. That it means that there's lots and lots of projects of different sizes that aren't necessarily specifically aimed at the 2030 agenda or sustainable development goals, but actually achieve that. And we need to showcase that via joint effort through projects that are meaningful. And that's what we're trying to do. And what we're going to put in the Local 2030 Coalition Secretariat is precisely that. I think just a month ago, a month and a half maybe, we were lucky enough to take part in a New York summit. And our Secretary General said more or less what I've just mentioned, that it is after 3 years hard work, we've reached the conclusion that we need to have an infrastructure so that the 2030 agenda can become reality. And what are those infrastructures? Well, we've found 5 of them. Firstly, a commitment to the 2030 agenda is not simply the aligning. I think it's more than that. I think the 2030 agenda needs to be what you see, first of all, for any of the government agenda. We're not just aligned with the 2030 agenda. We, institutions and society, need to be able to define what priority projects should be included in each legislature so as to be able to meet the 2030 agenda. That's a first kind of infrastructure. What's the second? The second is to be able to have a strategic program, not just in the long term, but for the medium and long term. This is also not easy, because on many occasions, electoral results imply and require problems to be solved. And we need to overcome that. The third infrastructure for me would be assessment of the 2030 agenda, evaluation, in other words, because if you don't assess something, it doesn't exist. If you don't measure it, it doesn't exist. We really need a good measurement system to measure what we're doing. Then I would talk about issues relating to dissemination of the 2030 agenda. We've still got a lot to do there. Society as a whole actually has very little knowledge about the 2030 agenda. Everybody says, oh, yeah, no, that's got to do with the academic world. And the academic world and some organized parts of organized civil society do know what the 2030 agenda is all about. But the man in the street, so to speak, doesn't know. We need to get the message out there to the general population. And this week, a postgrad program is going to be organized with the 3 universities of the Basque Country to train people, to educate people in SDGs. We've got some students already that are going to be participating in this program, and hopefully they will be able to have work experience at the Secretariat, and hopefully we can even exchange teaching staff with different UN organizations. And this is thanks to all the work carried out and the collaboration between 3 universities. And finally, we need a governance system. The example that we've got here, this multi-level, multi-stakeholder governance model in the Local 2030 Coalition is an example of that. We commented that with Chypre, we'd like to offer these 5 infrastructures, especially the governance of the Basque 2030 agenda. We'd like to offer that to the Local 2030 Coalition because we think we've got something to contribute there. The idea of working together, of collaborating, what we call Auzolana in Basque. In fact, the Basque Country exists because of its ability to work together. So, of course, we can offer the Local 2030 Coalition Secretariat our experience in that area, in working together. And maybe that'll be the embryo of this future multi-level, multi-stakeholder hub. That's all I want to say. Thank you so much, Aaron.
Euskara.
And now we're going to hand the floor to Eider Enunciaga, who's in charge of the areas of Basque citizen participation and Agenda 2030 at the Local Council of Bilbao. Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me here today.
All your team as well. Welcome and thank you very much for being here. Well, as you know, the process of opening the Secretariat of the United Nations Local 2030 Coalition in Bilbao has been a long and complex process. This morning, Chypre was using the term experience, and I like that very much, which has involved, as Asier was saying as well, many agents and, well, each of the agents with very different processes and very different realities. But there's something that Asier was talking about, and I would really like to support that message, is that all the agents and institutions involved, the Local 2030 Coalition, the state ministries, the Basque government, the BBK Foundation, and the Bilbao City Council, we are all convinced that deepening the localization of the SDGs is essential to accelerate their fulfillment. And it is thanks to the effort and collaboration of everyone that we are here today in Bilbao, in Euskadi, 1 year after the launch, to continue advancing in the Secretariat, a space that has already become a meeting and reference point for local and regional governments around the world. And this is something that we have seen during the SDG Summit in New York City last September. Bilbao and Euskadi and the Spanish state, we have become a reference for many, many others all around the world. Humanity has a challenge before it. We live in an era of transitions, which is aggravated furthermore by the terrible war conflicts that we are experiencing. Eremu demografikoan, biztanleriaren zahartzearen erronkari egin behar diogu aurre. Eta horrek beste erronka batzuk planteatzen ditu ere.
And this provides us with another challenge. Way we relate to each other in education and health. In the digital field, the way we relate with each other has changed. And this is a technological revolution. This also provides us with the opportunities to innovate, but also challenges for inclusion, for safety, etc. When we talk about climate, we are facing a climate emergency at a world level. We all know that, and we need to take steps. Climate change greenhouse gas emissions, the green economy. We need to compete in all these fields and intervene. Climate, demographic, and digital transition is a challenge, and we need to respond with innovative solutions.
Before, local and regional governments are key and have a key role to play. In fact, these transitions, the three transitions that I was mentioning, include all the global challenges that were agreed by all the actors in 2015. And I would like to emphasize the role of local governments, the role of how responsible we are in these agendas. We are the ones who are closest to the citizens and responsible for making the SDGs reality in our territories. En nuestro caso, en el caso del Ayuntamiento de Bilbao, si me lo permiten, me gustaría poner en valor.
I'd also like to, in the case of the Bilbao City Council, highlight three things. Firstly, our firm commitment to the 2030 agenda. Bilbao City Council has accepted a pledge and has worked in the last 3 years in advancing the localization plan in the Bilbao City Council, which was presented at the beginning of this year. But in the next period in office, 2023 to 2027, we've created a specific area for the 2030 agenda, and we work on specific actions that are going to allow Bilbao to take firm steps forward towards achieving SDGs. Secondly, a clear and an honest will to carry on collaborating closely with other stakeholders. Asier said that earlier. Achieving SDGs is something that we need to all do together. We will achieve it if we work together. We in the Town Council are committed to working with other institutions with different types, whether they be public, private, or whatever type they may be. Thirdly, our support for the public. This is something Asier also mentioned, this, how difficult it is to actually reach out to the public, not so much in the 2030 agenda per se, but the concepts, the ideas that are behind it. We need, as an institutions, to get this message across, not necessarily the terminology, but the concepts, the ideas that are behind it. In Bilbao, we have the concept Bilbao Reunía, which is a list of values, the values that we feel that glues the people of Bilbao together, which encourages citizens to get engaged in achieving SDGs. Each and every one of us have an important role to play, and we need to make them come true all together. We need to work on our different roles at home, at school, out in the street, and our relations with others, because the goal of more sustainable Bilbao requires more human development.
That I'm convinced that by working together, and I honestly believe that working together is the key, we will be able to build a more sustainable, a more fairer, and a more prosperous Bilbao, and that through the work that we do here, we'll be adding and we'll be putting our grain of sand to the achievement of the local agendas. Eskerrik asko guztioi, eta thank you very much again.
And now we're going to listen to Nora Sarasola, who's director of the charitable projects at Bilbao BBK Foundation. Thanks to everybody for coming. When on the 25th of September 2015, the General Assembly of UN approved for the first time the 2030 agenda. They included for the first time an direct appeal to a key stakeholder, which was business or the private sector. This is completely new. And within the private sector, we believe that organizations such as ours, the BBK Foundation, have a tremendous ability to contribute via projects, funding, and for our ability to mobilize the public, which has already been mentioned is difficult to mobilize, and to be connectors and an organization that encourages relations. We have relationships with public and private sector and in different sectors as well. Unsurprisingly, in this decade of action, these two sides are especially relevant. Firstly, the territorial side of things, which is all related to this coalition, and of course the sectorial dimension, which has also had our participation, which is how do we get the private sector to become a key stakeholder to accelerate the efforts to achieve the 2030 agenda with all the difficulties that involves, because of course business have their own short-term goals. So these two mentions, the territorial and the sectoral, are what meant that for BBK Foundation, it was important to become a partner in this tremendous project. In the BBK Foundation, we understand and share that the purpose that we are facing as a planet and as humankind is to move from this short-term model of growth to a model of long-term sustainable development and growth. And that's something that includes a social and environmental dimensions in what we conceive as wealth. And that puts people at the center and leaves nobody behind. One of the transformative characteristics of the 2030 agenda and of SDGs, and which coincides with the vision and values of BBK, is that it responds to a comprehensive view of the reality of territory, in our case, Vizcaya and the Basque Country. Our goal as a foundation is to achieve that economy, the Basque economy, be more competitive, but at the same time more sustainable. Transition from towards a sustainable, decarbonized model and based on social equality and human rights is very advanced in Europe, and has meant that the financing for development finds the ideal conditions of stability, low volatility, and medium and long-term viewpoint, which are necessary to achieve SDGs and the 2030 agenda. The Foundation BBK is the main shareholder, of course, of a banking or financial institution and knows how important it is to plan in the long term and considers that it has a relevant contribution to make to this critical aspect of the 2030 agenda, which is to generate conditions in local context to attract funding towards sustainable development. BBK Foundation believes that the transformative capacity of the localization process of SDGs requires, of course, the ability to mobilize public-private collaboration and multi-stakeholders in all territories, all that are aimed to the achieving of shared goals. That's why we wanted to support the creation of the 2030 Coalition Secretariat here in Bilbao, contributing to the relevant design for an action plan for localizing SDGs and the 2030 agenda without anybody being left behind. And of course, in each and every reality around the planet. We want to be partners of the public institutions that are here today in building an active citizenry. We know that's very complex. We're aware and protagonists of local challenges, working on culture, art, sensitization, and all in the same territory. And it's via our projects, our charitable projects, such as in BBK Kuna, or artistic programs, such as the Kickstart program, and also other programs that make people aware of climate change or loneliness. We will achieve this. The way that we're going to achieve these transformation processes is via SDGs. The process for this to be effective is that these SDGs be localized, that is, that they be recognizable, that they have a name, a face, an identity, memory, reality. And the means to achieve these transformations is via alliances between different public and private, local, private and public stakeholders, which in the BBK Foundation we are supporting.
Ahora vamos a escuchar
now we're going to listen
el trabajo de la Coalición 2030, la Coalición Global
Shipra Narang, and she's going to talk about how the United Nations promotes the idea of localization, what's been achieved over recent months, and how we can look to the future. Next year, the Secretary General of the United Nations has called the Summit of the Future. It'll be in September 2024, which will seek a long-time look at the process of sustainable development. And next year, Local 2030 will be considered one of the one of the 12 high-impact programs promoted by the Secretary of the United Nations. So it's very important what the coalition is already doing. So Shipra Narang Suri is Chief of Urban Practices Branch at UN Habitat and Head of Secretariat Local 2030 Coalition.
It's a huge pleasure to listen to you and see how much we have advanced into localizing processes worldwide in the Agenda 2030, what Secretariat is doing, and especially what we're going to be doing in the future. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Buenas tardes, Arratsaldeon. Good afternoon. It's great to be here back in Bilbao. I feel like it's my second home. The number of trips I have made to Bilbao in the last 4 years, I would say, twice a year minimum. So I think it's time to perhaps invest in some real estate and buy an apartment here. Greetings also on United Nations Day. It's UN Day today, and it's quite fitting that we meet here to talk about the Agenda 2030. Which is the biggest agenda of the United Nations, and the strategies to achieve 2030 agenda, which is through localization. And we've heard several colleagues talk about it, and I will come to it in a second. I head the Secretariat of the Local 2030 Coalition. In addition to being the Chief of the Urban Practices Branch at UN Habitat. I work very closely in this process with the colleagues from UNDP, which co-chairs the Local 2030 Coalition along with UN Habitat, and with colleagues from FAO, which is upcoming as the next co-chair of the coalition. And colleagues will join me at the end to make a couple of remarks when I finish my presentation. Let me see if this works. No. Okay. Just because you run a secretariat doesn't mean you're great in technology. Wait, let me try this. No. Yeah. Okay, it works. Magic. So let's talk a little bit about the relevance of localizing the SDGs, which we've heard a little bit from everybody, and talk a little bit about what localization means. For us, it's very important. We all use the phrase localization differently. And to me, it became very, very clear, as I was saying to colleagues this morning or this afternoon, it became very clear when I was in a meeting with philanthropies at the SDG Summit in New York in September. What they mean when they use the word localization is very different from what we mean when in this context, in this community, all of us, and I count myself as part of this community, talks about localization. When we talk about localization, we're talking about an approach that includes everyone, a whole of government, whole of society. We heard Christina say that, and many of you. An approach that links national policies with local action in a coherent, connected way that engages local actors, that engages subnational actors, that engages national actors, and that has a very prominent role of local and regional governments. This is how I look at localization. It's also that localization doesn't mean that national government abdicates and hands over its responsibility to the local level. It also doesn't mean that the local level becomes responsible for everything and takes it over. It's a symbiotic relationship, I would say, to do things together. It means that communities are at the center, but everybody else around them is an ecosystem that has to work together. But that is not how everybody else always understands localization. Many people think that localization is all about devolution, which it is not. Others believe that localization is all about giving power to the local communities alone and allowing them to lead, which is fine, but does not always lead to scaled up impact. So we need a combination of actors and a combination of levels to work in tandem and in synergy. That is when we will be able to accelerate and scale up progress towards sustainable development. That is when we will be able to ensure inclusion and leaving no one behind. That is when we will be able to strengthen multi-level governance structures. That is how we will be able to work at territorial scales. And you in this part of the world, in this country, recognize and understand territorial scales much better than anybody else in the world. That is where we'll be able to empower and build capacities of stakeholders, because it's very easy to say stakeholders should be involved. But if you do not empower them and if you do not strengthen their capacities, their engagement is meaningless, right? This is the power and the importance and the relevance of localization. And this is what we are here to advance together. The Local 2030 Coalition is not another UN agency. It's not another entity of the UN like UN Habitat, where I come from, or UNDP, or UNICEF, or UNHCR, or the UN Global Compact, or IOM. It is a convening place. It is a platform. It is a place which brings several UN agencies together, not just with themselves, but with a range of other actors. The private sector, foundations and philanthropies, local government networks, interested national governments, the financial institutions, civil society organizations. This is the place where everybody comes to advance localization. That's the idea. The idea of the coalition is not to implement projects. You are doing projects. You're already implementing great projects from what I'm hearing from not just this visit, but all the time. And what we are seeing in Bilbao, in the Basque Country, but also in many other parts of Spain. We've been working with the city of Madrid. We've been working with Barcelona. I work with Andalusia. We work with Extremadura. So projects, stakeholders, organizations, local governments, UN entities, everybody implements projects. But what the Local 2030 Coalition aims to do is to amplify and scale up all those initiatives for transformative impact, so that a project doesn't remain just a project at a small scale, but really becomes the game changer at the global scale. Connecting the local to the global scale is what this does. What the coalition also aims to do is to provide a bridge between not just knowledge and policy and action, but also very importantly, between policy, planning, action, and investments. Because very often the money question is where we all lose the battle. That the investments are made in cities and communities, but they are not transformative. They are not being made in the right direction. They're not having the impact on the SDGs that we want them to have. There is no dearth, there is no limitation on investments, but are they going to the right things? Are they having the transformative impact? The Local 2030 Coalition aims to make that bridge between ideas and investments and implementation and realization of the global goals. And finally, it aims to demonstrate the UN's collective offer on local action. because the UN system is also fragmented. It's not one. We are many, many organizations, many entities, many offices. We don't all do localization equally well. So it's important that we come together, we learn from each other, and we join forces, and we also serve the people we need to serve together as one. And that's part of the mandate of the Local 2030 Coalition. I want to show you this video. I hope it will work, that we used at the SDG Summit. It's really very very evocative, very illustrative, and I hope, let's see if it works actually. This is the SDGs talking to each other. Oops. Technology. No. Mm-hmm. I think that's a good message. It's not the whole thing, but it's let me try to move it to a little bit more, otherwise we leave it. No. It's all right. Localization is the key to getting the SDGs back on track. Let's leave it at that message. And I think what we aim to do through the coalition, through the coalition is to work on 3 broad pillars: advocacy, action, and monitoring. Again, this is not about project implementation, but it's about advocacy, generating a deeper understanding of localization. It also involves a lot of capacity building, working with different local actors. We were talking earlier about how do we make sure that everybody everywhere embraces the SDGs, not just institutional representatives who know already, who are convinced. We are in a, what do we say? We are preaching to the converted here. How do we know that every person, the man on the street, the woman on the street, understands and embraces and knows what the SDGs are about? It is also meant to accelerate action on the ground for the 6 transitions that we have been talking about in the UN system. Very simply, transitions that you may have heard in the media: the food transition, the energy transition, climate, biodiversity, digitalization. These are the big transitions that we need to achieve the SDGs. Localization is the key, and the Local 2030 Coalition is the vehicle to accelerate progress on these transitions. To boost monitoring and reporting, many of you may have been involved with or may have heard about the voluntary local reviews, which cities are preparing on the SDGs. Countries prepare voluntary national reviews, cities prepare voluntary local reviews, and we have seen that these have become very important tools for people to understand the SDGs, to build a baseline, and then to work towards common goals. And finally, leverage greater financing. I talked already about this. Greater financing and targeted investment to go to scale. Because really what is missing is the targets were talking to each other. You saw that. Only 12% of the SDG targets are on track. This is what we heard at the SDG Summit. There are 169 targets. 12% means less than 20 of them are on track. The rest of them are either stalled or they are regressing. How do we make sure that we make progress is by not just national governments, but by everybody taking charge of those targets and all of us making the effort that have scaled up impact. So the coalition, as I started by saying, is co-chaired by 2 UN entities. UN Habitat is the permanent co-chair. UNDP was the first co-chair with us and will rotate after their 2-year term at the end of this year to FAO, which will take over the Food and Agricultural Organization. And beyond 2025, there will be another co-chair, and we have an interest from 3 UN entities to co-chair, which is already a mark of success of the coalition. We have 6 steering committee members, 1 representing a national government, which is currently Italy, 1 representing a local government, which is currently Freetown, 1 representing a local and regional government network, which is currently United Cities and Local Governments, the network of cities and local governments based in Barcelona. 1 from the private sector, Clara is here, sits on the board of the Global Compact and is a member of our steering committee. 1 representative of civil society organizations. We have a young woman from Kenya, a youth representative. And finally, the host of the Secretariat, which is the government of Spain. So these are the 6 steering committee members that guide the work of the coalition. Secretariat is led by Habitat and hosted, of course, here in Bilbao. We also have the UN Directors Group, 16 UN entities that participate in it, and many hubs and an increasing number of hubs working in different regions and specific themes. Let me quickly touch upon the big milestones that we have achieved since the opening of the office in Bilbao. On 31st of October last year, we opened the office. We have been working to set it up properly and fully. It's not just been an experience, it's been a journey. And one day I will write a case study about multi-level governance and multi-stakeholder partnership, which is based on this experience, but not today. But it has really been a fantastic exercise in commitment as well. Not once has any of the partners said, no, this is not really what we want to do, or we have a serious difference with what the UN perceives this to be, or what we have, or we have a difference among ourselves. Not once. And I think it is really phenomenal how this cooperation, Azir, you were talking about it, how this cooperation has brought us together. It's not just about activating the Secretariat here. The coalition has been working. This coalition, supported by all of you, by the government of Spain, by the Basque Country, by Bilbao, by BBK, and by other partners, the government of Italy and the UN entities, has been working. We have had major impact on the political processes in the UN system. Over the last 2 years, localization has become the name of the game in the high-level political forum, in the SDG Summit, many governments standing up and hosting events on localization, many more cities submitting voluntary local reviews, many governments coming and presenting voluntary national reviews that included city inputs. In fact, at the last summit or at the last HLPF, the voluntary national review of Finland was presented by a representative from Helsinki. This is important. These are very important, game-changing, transformative processes that we together have engineered and influenced. We have had, the high-level political forum has seen many side events and many discussions on localization. The Food Systems Summit in Rome, which talked about stock taking on food systems, saw a lot of discussion on localization. The joint SDG fund, and we will hear from them, has made localization an important priority in all its work. We've launched a call for seed funding on localization. We hope to open a window at some point on localization. And the SDG Summit in September, you mentioned the High Impact Initiative, which was launched there. And we are really running ahead with a number of advocacy activities. We have training activities. We have requests for support every day. We have bilateral discussions with philanthropies, with business, people asking us, how can we support? This has been a game-changing year for the localization movement. And I can say that this has been in no small measure thanks to the support that we've had from Spain and all the actors here in Spain. This was last year, and you will recognize some of the faces in that photo. And this is just examples of some of the events and some of the forums that we've had. And I will leave a copy of the presentation which you can share. We have a steering committee that meets annually. This year we met in New York in July to develop the work plan, to approve the strategic actions that we need to take, the new terms of reference of the steering committee, the roadmap, and we will have a new cohort of steering committee members in next year or for another two-year period. We also have a mechanism of offering small grants through, again, the support of Spain, which is the biggest donor to the joint SDG fund, a competitive call for seed funding for small proposals, $150,000 to $300,000, $350,000 was launched earlier this year through the joint SDG fund, a very competitive process. And we have, I think, about maybe a total of 15 or 16 proposals that are being approved right now, and we can hear from the joint SDG fund a little bit more about it. So it's also about giving financing to small, catalytic, impactful local actions that can become game changers on the SDGs. And there are many examples of those. We've also had a number of activities around women-led cities, around local and regional government forums, at the SDG Summit, and of course then the High Impact Initiative itself. But we're not working on this alone. We have partners who do work on localization. It's not just the Secretariat, and this is where I think the role of this group, this alliance, the GUNEAC, the partners here, is very important. Everybody can make a contribution to the work of the Local 2030 Secretariat. Everybody can make a contribution to the work of the Local 2030 Coalition. You're all contributors to this process. UN Habitat has its own approach. FAO is working on multi-level governance for sustainable food systems. The Global Task Force of Local Governments is advancing the localization agenda. The Hawaii Hub on the Green Growth Hub and the Islands Hub is working on supporting islands, small islands, on localization of the SDGs. The UNHCR, Mayor's Migration Council, and IOM are working on the migration agenda and localization and local action on that. So everybody has a role to play. And these are just a few examples of what we are doing together. Let me conclude by the way forward. 2 quick slides. One is, of course, what are the big events that are coming up? We have, of course, tomorrow, the forum that I've been kindly invited for here in the Basque Country, the Social Transition Agenda 2030 Forum. We have on the 27th of October, the event hosted by the government of Spain under the umbrella of the framework of the EU presidency on boosting localization of the 2030 agenda. We have an event organized by the Committee of Regions in Brussels. We have the Global Refugee Forum coming up. We have the COP coming up. Then we have the next year's High-Level Political Forum, Summit of the Future, and the World Urban Forum in November next year, which will focus on localization. And in terms of the setup of the Secretariat, and Asier asked me to explain this a little bit on next steps, we are currently recruiting the key staff to the Secretariat here in Bilbao. We are also hoping that the secondments to the Secretariat, whether from the Basque Country or partners and others, will materialize by the first quarter of 2024. We can start using the premises once we have a legal agreement by 2024 first quarter. And we hope to bring the UN directors to Bilbao for a retreat of the coalition in the first quarter or the end of the first quarter of 2024. We also want to shift the steering committee meetings of the Local 2030 Coalition to Bilbao. This is our home. This is not just my home. This is our home. This is the home of localization. And we want to make sure that the world recognizes that. Thank you very much for your patience. And with your permission, Ranchak, if I can ask maybe my colleagues from UNDP and FAO to say a few words. From UNDP, I have Rishi Chakravarti, who's the policy analyst on cities and urbanization. Rishi, if you're online and you would like to say a few words, and then I'll pass on after that to FAO and introduce Olena.
Thank you so much, Shipra, and good evening, everyone. I just wanted to highlight a few points from UNDP's perspective. UNDP just released a study across 95 countries in our SDG Insights report, which shows that the majority of developing economies have increased their carbon emissions since 2019, while they have also grown economically, but yet only 1/3 have actually reduced poverty. So our findings are clear. There's a growing gap between the development that many countries and communities want, that is good for people and the planet, and the growth they get, that is often driven by crisis response and increasing debt among countries. Across regions and countries, what resonates are productive jobs, effective institutions, resilient infrastructure, and sustainable cities. And all of these will require local action to accelerate and achieve. UNDP is committed to actively support the Local 2030 Coalition, as Shipra mentioned, as a convening place, a network of networks, which is now even more critical than ever to boost the 2030 agenda and the SDGs over the next 7 years. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rishi, and thank you for the great support we've had from UNDP over the last 2 years. And we're not letting you off the hook just because you're handing over the co-chair role to FAO. From FAO, we now have Olena Ovchnikova, who is the technical officer in the Office of the SDGs. Olena, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shipra. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, colleagues, FAO is a member of the Local 2030 Coalition and future co-chair in 2024-2025. Is happy to be already supporting the work of the coalition through, for instance, side events, such as the event during the Regional Forum on Sustainable Development in Geneva in March this year, or the UN Food Systems Summit +2 stock-taking moment in Rome in July this year, as well as the development, together with the other co-chair, UNDP, of a toolkit for Europe and Central Asia on localizing the Sustainable Development Goals through subnational development planning and budgeting. FAO is looking forward to joint work in 2024 and beyond, including within the framework of the High Impact Initiative. We're also very grateful for the support of the government of Spain, Basque government, and the city of Bilbao that have already contributed to the success of the coalition. We wish all of us productive work ahead and, of course, impactful outcomes. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Muchas gracias. Escaricasco. Thank you. Back to you.
Thanks a lot, Shipra. I think you gave us loads of information that we were so eager to know. So thank you very much. Now I have the pleasure to give the floor to Lisa Curbiel, head of the Secretariat of a joint SDG fund, which is a strong partner for the Local 2030 Coalition. Lisa, please.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, colleagues. Pleasure to be here. I will be sharing my screen, and if you could let me know if you can see them.
That's perfect, yes.
Wonderful, wonderful. Colleagues, I'm privileged today to represent the UN Joint SDG Fund, to join all of you in this critical conversation. Regrets I cannot be in beautiful Bilbao with all of you, but I hope that is in my immediate and near future. Why is the Joint SDG Fund joining you today? You already have so many leaders highlighting the critical nature of impact, the conviction that we must have impact at local level, and certainly that it takes not only defining what that means, but the long-term strategy to ensure we reach the goal. I believe it's because Spain has identified the Joint SDG Fund as a critical financing vehicle to achieve the SDGs. And I think your Prime Minister's reiteration of this support and his commitment of the government of Spain in 120 million euros to the fund by 2027 is another reinforcement of the role of Spain and its leadership. Localization must be a pivotal driver across the key transitions to achieve the SDGs. And I'm here really just to give you a snapshot of the critical nature of localization within the fund. I'll start with this slide here, colleagues, which just shows you how this flagship mechanism is taking shape. And I'll make this a little bit bigger. Apologies for that. As you know, colleagues, the SDG Summit, the high impact initiatives, and in fact, the political declaration of the General Assembly this year highlighted that these transitions must be at the heart of the UN development system's offer to governments around the world. If we do not address climate, if we do not address the digital divide, food systems, or energy access, we will never achieve the SDGs. And I think it's how each of these is brought to the local level, how localization steers this portfolio as a driver of impact is what we're here today for. If decent jobs and social protection don't make a difference at a mother's dinner table where she's trying to feed her 5 children, if the climate, biodiversity, and pollution efforts don't make a difference in a local village in sub-Saharan Africa, then all of this rhetoric is a waste of time. And I'm here to share highlights of how localization is going to be woven into the engine room actions. This is another piece that we have as a calling card from the SDG Summit. The policy and regulatory frameworks that will guarantee the embedding of local actors into the success of these transitions, the bankability, the market-ready ability of us to market and attract not only public sector, but private sector donors to these transitions, what that financing mix will mean in terms of the deal room. The BBK colleague spoke so eloquently about that alliance between public and private actors and how we work together. And then finally, the acknowledgement that governments all over the world need that capacity to be strengthened so this can be implemented and rolled out efficiently. This slide, colleagues, reiterates Secretary General Guterres's point that to make multilateral institutions, our beloved United Nations, more effective, we must have the perspectives and engagement of local and regional authorities. We've heard those voices earlier today. We will continue to be guided by them, and we will make sure that no SDG transition doesn't land at local level. And that's why Shipra and the colleagues that she had join her today are so critical, because there is a coalition of over 16 UN agencies, funds, and programs that will steer localization through the 6 transitions of the fund. UNDP, FAO, and 7 other agencies, funds, and programs sit on the operational steering committee of this fund to ensure that these strategies are woven into the project proposals that come up from the resident coordinators from the country level, and that the implementation and the guidance goes back down so that the local level ideas can be scaled up, but they absolutely still have impact. Whole of society is where the systemic change needs to occur, and the leveraging and the funding is how we have to make sure that the Spain critical contribution to the fund is leveraged, and your 120 million reaches the billions, right? We have to find ways to unlock other resources. And I'll just give 2 quick examples of how we've already been doing that in the fund, because I think it's important that you know localization isn't new to the Joint SDG Fund. We have always had the last mile, the most vulnerable, who are the furthest from capital, who may be the least on the grid or access to public services, have always been the focus, right? Why do we work in small island developing states, in least developed countries, in landlocked countries, and other vulnerable and conflict affected countries? Because we know that's where the most vulnerable are, and we know that's where the greatest movement of the needle on the SDGs rests. So here's an example. In Indonesia, where we have capital markets that are quite sophisticated, we are now moving from green sovereign bonds and sovereign financial instruments like sukuks to inaugural municipal bonds. Municipal bonds rest very much at the local, city, and municipal level. And it's through those municipal bonds that we're now reaching small and medium enterprises, all for the green and just energy transition, all to be producing products, to be creating innovative opportunities for investments and for job creation and green jobs at local level. That's a great example of how $1 into the joint SDG fund is often leveraged into $5, $8, or $10. And that's because we're using innovative financing, we're using capital markets, we're using financial instruments that are commonplace to our banking colleagues, but have been somehow second seated within the UN system. How do we reverse that and make sure that all of the innovations that are available to us are maximized within the fund? Another great example is from Albania, where local social care plans have been developed through policy support that we finance through the joint SDG fund. And as we replenish those social funds, we're piloting new models at local level. Local level is where mental health crises are unfolding. Local level is where our young people are depressed because they don't have opportunities. They're graduating from either high school or college without employment opportunities. Colleagues, this is the post-COVID world that we must be paying attention to. And this is an example of how in Albania, a national level policy is being taken down to the local level. So Shipra's already highlighted the goals of the SDG localization. What I'm doing now is just aligning those very same goals with how the joint SDG fund is operating and how this initial envelope that Shipra already highlighted, right? These initial seed planting of seeds, right? These seed joint programs are meant to blossom into fuller joint programs as other donors follow Spain's leadership in this area. And the idea is that further and further investment across the transitions, across digital, across food systems, across climate action will enable innovative solutions to come all the way down to local level. We will begin with 27 country proposals. These are in the process of being vetting. And as additional pledges come through into the fund, this will be expanded next year. Before we open for questions, I just wanted to give a few snapshot examples of how we already are seeing the alignment between localization and these larger transitions, which by nature of the scope and the enormity of what they must achieve are being done. In Egypt, where we know that there are so many geographic disparities, especially when you get away from capital and larger city areas, how can a digital upgrade of a monitoring system of the SDGs? So what does it mean to end poverty in a local community in Egypt? It has to be monitored at the local level to get the nuance of where those vulnerable families live and what that mother or father needs for their children. That local community and that local government is doing that monitoring. And by giving them the digital and spatial and geographical capacity to monitor that on a dashboard, you're giving them the tools to fast track SDG progress. And that gets really exciting because they're not waiting for something to come down from central level into the hands of the local leaders. The local leaders will have the data and they'll be tracking it in real time. That's progress, colleagues. And that's technology for the vulnerable. It's not getting on the grid so more people have access to Google. No, it's accessing digital to reach and to serve the most vulnerable. Similarly, in Thailand, looking at climate action, the huge transition of climate action, biodiversity, and our war against pollution and waste. In 22 local provincial governance, they are scaling up waste management and they're linking it to bankable projects that will be supported by a national green bond that's being led at the prime minister level. So Green bonds, as we know, another innovative financing tool. If done only at national level, we may not have that embedment. We might not have it landing at local level. But in Thailand, thanks to the resident coordinator, thanks to the UN agencies on the ground, they're taking that opportunity and they're taking that financing, that new financing, and taking it specifically to campaigns across 22 provinces at local level. Just two more examples, colleagues. I promise I'll stop, but it gets very exciting for me because this is where the rubber hits the road, colleagues. This is how you can feel assured that Spain's leadership is being taken up by the UN development system. You are helping steer a 50 billion a year spend towards these transitions, and we have to be very strategic or we won't hit the target. So the target, again, how in Bosnia and Herzegovina, how can we have impacts on child nutrition and overall behavioral change? Who controls how each of us eat, colleagues? It's very, very basic to how we've all understood what nutrition is. How does government help support that? It has to be through schools. It has to be through local community groups. It has to be through mothers groups. This is where local capacity for evidence-based food systems is transformed. Of course, through materials produced through ministries of education and ministries of health, of course, but also through what can be embedded and delivered at local level. And then finally, final example in Ghana, taking us to Africa, we have extreme poverty, as we know. What can voluntary local reviews, right? We all know what voluntary national reviews offer. They offer this opportunity to explore SDG progress. What if we expanded those civil society platforms and now had 20 voluntary local reviews, really advocating for the rights of those in Ghana that are definitely at the bottom quintile and at the most extreme levels of poverty. So colleagues, I will stop there and I will stop sharing my screen, handing it back over to the wonderful moderator and colleagues in Bilbao, and I'm available for questions as needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. We have a bit of time to open the floor for questions, both present and those who are online. So we don't want to extend too long, but we would ask you to very briefly present yourselves and pose your questions to either Shipra or Lisa. We have some microphones we can share so that there are, people online can hear us. Sentiros con libertad de hacer preguntas en castellano, en euskera o en inglés. Una breve presentación y una pregunta que pueda ser para Lisa o para Shipra.
Hi, Shipra. Thanks very much for your contribution, and all the speakers as well. My name is Nerea Arambarri. I come from the University of Deusto, and I guess one of our areas of focus in GUNEAC is about, and we mentioned earlier as well, is about the activation of citizens. You said like the woman or the man on the street, like that person that is not organized in NGOs, association, is not part of governments. And I guess my question is, within the coalition of Local 2030, is this something that is contemplated like specifically, or is there like a specific strategy or an approach towards promoting that, not just participation, but engagement or empowerment of those anonymous citizens? Thank you.
Yeah. Vamos a tomar varias preguntas y luego responder a todas seguidas.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Shipra, for your great presentation. I have a question for you. My name is Nayara Goya. I'm the Managing Director at the Aranzazu Lab, which is a Democracy and Governance Innovation Lab. So my question is on the collaborative governance approach to localize SDGs and develop the 2030 agenda. We believe that we need to strengthen the networks between public institutions, social stakeholders and citizens to achieve the great challenge of achieving the SDGs. But As my colleague Nerea was mentioning, we want to take participation to the next level. We are talking about reshaping the relationship between institutions and civil society. We are talking about sharing power and providing citizens a more meaningful role. And for that, we believe that we need new methods and new capacities, like new spaces for different actors and sensitivities to listen, to dialogue, and act together. So my question is, if I understood you correctly, you share this approach of collaborative governance. To what extent the Secretariat will incorporate this approach of collaborative governance? And the second question is, do you know at a global scale other collaborative governance advanced experiences for localizing SDGs that we can learn from? Thank you.
Thank you, Cipra, for your inspiring conference. My name is Fernando Sierra. I'm the Managing Director of Euskalit, the Basque Foundation for Advanced Management. We are part of the core group working with Asier and their team, pushing the use of the SDGs and the 2030 agenda in the Basque Country, especially related with the companies and with the organizations. And I would like to ask you for a desire. Which is the role that you would like for the companies and especially for the SMEs to have in order to spread the use of the SDGs in the world?
Thank you, Francine. And well, and first of all, thank you very much, Cipra, and the rest of speakers, because it's been really insightful this afternoon. I would like just to, building on my previous colleagues, well, I'm sorry, Javier Cortés, we introduced before, and quote-to-quote expert in public-private partnership for localization. As I said, building on the previous questions, well, I had the chance to work together with this institutional body that Asier was mentioning before, this articulation body to ensure that public-private collaboration is working in, as Nerea was saying, in activation of citizenship in the territory. Second, as Nayara was mentioning, innovation in public governance. As Fernando was mentioning as well, innovating also in private sector, how it embeds SDGs in the business models, and altogether trying to transform the social, environmental, economic reality of the territory. My question is, how does the Secretariat envision, how can we put together this narrative in terms of qualitative changes and assets to transform the reality so that we can connect and resonate with other territories in the world through the Secretariat Coalition? I mean, how do we ensure that we jump into scalability, okay, and inspire impacts and seize the universality potential of transformation of the SDGs? Thank you.
I start. Wow, thank you very much.
One more?
One more?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is David Fernandez, and I work with the cluster organizations in SPRI agency, the Economic Development Agency of the Basque Country. We have been working so far with the clusters and SMEs on embedding the SDGs into the strategies. Given that SMEs account for 95% of SMEs at European Union level and probably higher in other geographies, how can we better work to make SMEs part of this movement as compared to corporations who usually have larger resources and have a more easy way of embedding SDGs onto their strategies and plans? Thank you.
Very good. Going, gone. Great. Thank you very much. I think almost all of the questions are interconnected. So let me try and respond to them in a holistic way rather than individually. First of all, it's not. Let me start backwards. It's not the Secretariat providing a strategy or a narrative. I think it's us providing a platform for taking experiences and narratives and strategies and successful approaches from all around the world and bringing them together and sharing them and amplifying them. So I just want to set expectations right, that it's not the Secretariat is not, or even the coalition itself is not the solution providing space. Perhaps we call it the solutions exploring space together and the solutions amplifying space. So I think that's very important for us as a team to define what we do as the Local 2030 Coalition. Having said that, I think there are 2 or 3 things that are very important when it comes to activation of engagement of citizens. You talked about it, Nerea and Ira, you talked about it, as well as smaller protagonists, players like SMEs in cities and communities. As a planner and as someone who has done participatory planning forever and from UN Habitat, which also has a lot of tools on participatory planning, I think the first principle is that we have to meet people where they are. We cannot start with the premise of SDGs. We have to start with the problems that people are facing and expecting us to solve for them. It's very easy for us to push the SDGs agenda. But as Lisa was saying, if it makes no difference to the single mother who's trying to bring up her 5 children, she's not going to understand your language, our language on SDGs. But she's going to understand what job security means, what social protection means, what access to education and healthcare for her children means. So it's really very important that we sometimes even quit our narrative and really start the conversation from where people are sitting. And we were talking about this over lunch today, that if it is the anonymous citizen, if you meet, Bilbao is fantastic. My experience is in Bilbao. One day I will write a book. If you meet these singers in Plaza Nueva, the men who sing, as a group, and they sit down for a drink and then they sing, or they take a drink from a bar and they sing. If they stopped and you sat with them for 5 minutes and asked them how they are, if you ask any of them, how are you today? He will tell you in 5 minutes what you need to do about development in this city. He will tell you how he cannot access his social benefits. He will tell you how his grandchildren went to school, but the pavement was broken. The child fell off the bicycle. He will tell you how his health insurance is not paying him. He will tell you how he went to the hospital, but the nurse was not there, and the facilities are so stupid, and the people are so... They will tell you. That's one way of really meeting people where they are. The other way of meeting people where they are is really asking them about their aspirations for the next 5 to 7 years, rather than us telling them our aspirations for the next 7 years, which is the Agenda 2030. And there are many, many examples, many rich examples of how this has been done in participatory planning, in engagement, in public engagement, in civic engagement in different parts of the world. If you go to the Local 2030 website, if you go to the SDG Localization platform, we have the cards here. We have lots of materials, Lucia, somewhere that maybe we can leave on the side of the room. When people leave, they can take. There are many, many great case studies and great examples. when you talk about the funding that the SDG, the joint SDG fund does, and Lisa gave some fantastic examples. I wish you have time to go to the SDG fund website and see the kinds of projects they are funding. They're not funding hardware projects. They're not funding, creation of a new sewage treatment plant. But what they are funding is projects which are upstream, building of community for the first time, social policies, creation of a new plan, creation of a new social protection plan, community development and engagement for the SDGs. Somebody is actually funding and willing to fund these softer engagement elements, which are never funded in public policy. There's never enough money for participation. There's a lot of money for jazzy plans, land use drawings, and GIS maps, but there's never enough money for participatory planning, right? But we are trying through the joint SDG fund, through the work on localization in the joint SDG fund, to support these upstream innovative partnership building approaches that can change the way we engage communities and the way communities engage us. SMEs are a very, very important player in many parts of the world. Spain, I did not know this was such a major sector. In India, where I come from, micro, small, and medium enterprises are the backbone of our economy. They may not have a vision of a global impact, but they impact their communities every day. And they have peculiar issues: getting a business license, being able to influence opening hours, closing hours based on what they can get, whether the street in front of them is pedestrianized or not makes a difference to their business, whether whether they're allowed to open on certain holidays affects their business. All these are public policies that affect their business and affect their ability to do business in cities. And I think, again, meeting them where they are and asking them, what stops you from growing? What are the barriers to growth? Because the minute they tell you the barriers, you're able to talk to them about public policies that can break down those barriers. And that's where the SDGs come in. As Inigo was saying earlier, there is no problem which cannot be situated inside the framework of the SDGs, the 17 goals and the 169 targets. But we need to get the challenges from the communities in language that the communities speak, and then translate it into our own language rather than the other way around. That's my main sense in this. And I hope that we can lift up your experiences as well and bring them to the coalition, share them more widely, set up communities of practice of other people in other parts of the world who are struggling with the same approaches and the same challenges, and build those bridges. Thanks, Saraju.
I think, is there any other question alguna otra pregunta que queráis trasladar tanto a Shipra como a Lisa? Well, thank you very much, Shipra, Lisa, Álvaro, Cristina, Asier, Nora, Eider, Francine, Lucia. It's been a pleasure having you here today, again in Bilbao, your home. Difficult to make conclusions, but I think a few key messages that I've gathered. Regardless of what we understand for localization, I think I come together with your perspective, putting the community at the center and building an ecosystem around this community to bring changes, to facilitate and build the capacities so that everybody can make contributions to change lives of people at the local level. We've talked about whole government approach, whole society approach, and I think the steering committee is a great example of a whole UN system approach, which we didn't mention, but it's a challenge itself. So congratulations on that. Very good example set there. You've shared some of the successes during this last year. Congratulations and thank you for bringing local 2030 and localization processes to the core of the UN system, to the core of the SDG building processes worldwide. We really appreciate that, and we learned that that has been achieved. Thank you very much. Loads of tasks ahead, a very intense year ahead until the Summit of the Future. But I think we have the capacities, the partnerships, and probably the resources, if we pull all of them together, to bring it to New York next year with huge level of success, and then looking towards 2030 with a big smile on our faces. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks to all colleagues. Eskerrik asko benetan. Hurrengora arte. Next one. We see you.